It kills tens of thousands of Americans every year. It's in our news. It's in our entertainment. But what exactly is it? Opioids are narcotics that can be used medically for pain relief and anesthesia. Opioids used in a medical setting can come in the form of pills such as hydrocodone, oxycodone, and Vicodin, or intravenously in drugs such as fentanyl. An ambulance service allowed me to film the inside of one of their ambulances to show the dual-locked box where they keep their narcotics, one of which being fentanyl. Many medicinal opioids are abused, as well as lead to addiction with illicit opioids such as heroin. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, nearly 50,000 people died in 2017 due to drug overdoses involving opioids. To put this number into perspective, the amount of people in the U.S. that died from opioid overdoses in 2017 is 1,634 more people than the amount of U.S. battle deaths in the Vietnam War. In order to learn more about how the opioid crisis has affected our community, I received permission from the West Fargo Police Department to interview one of their undercover drug detectives.
I'm a detective with the West Fargo Police Department. I'm currently assigned to the Drug Enforcement Administration Task Force in Fargo. Right now my responsibilities are primarily to counter narcotics trafficking and also investigate money laundering activities in and out of the state of North Dakota. The most common form of opioid right now in the Fargo-Moorhead area, or even in the state, I would say, is probably a toss-up between heroin or pills, opioid pills, whether it's your hydrocodone or stuff like that. The groups that are using heroin in the Fargo-Moorhead area are primarily younger individuals in their late teens, early to mid-20s. We are seeing more and more heroin, and we're starting to see larger quantities of it being trafficked. The heroin that's coming into the Fargo-Moorhead area, some of the heroin has fentanyl laced into it, and that is what's going to be responsible for a lot of the overdoses and overdose deaths, because addicts believe they're just using straight heroin and they get a dose that's got some fentanyl mixed in it, and they use it and they overdose, and sometimes they die. Sometimes the fentanyl is so powerful that even if you do get Narcaned, it's not going to make a difference. Well, it's affected the community. I think the biggest thing is, a couple years ago, especially before 2016, when we had a lot of incidents, it wasn't something that was out there in the open. We still had overdose deaths, but they weren't as predominant as they were in 2016 when we had a large number of them, and that got into the public eye fairly quickly, obviously, and people started to become aware of the situation more than they probably were at prior to all those deaths. I don't think people realized it was a problem like it is. I don't think they realized that there was as much heroin around or fentanyl around as there is and was at that time. Well, I think one of the bigger things we need to do, especially with the fentanyl that's coming off the dark web, is we need to put more pressure on China to hold their people responsible. The Chinese government is, I don't believe, doing all they can do to combat the amount of fentanyl that's getting shipped out of China and into the United States. And as far as stuff that Congress or whatever can do to help fight the issue, I don't know a single answer for that. There's a lot of things that need to be done. We're not going to arrest our way out of this problem. We've never been able to do that. We need more, probably, funding for treatment. Need more funding for treatment, and we need more education for younger individuals about the dangers of opioids. I don't believe becoming more lenient on the drug traffickers is going to help. I think the minimum mandatory federal sentencing guidelines need to stay in place for people that traffic opioids such as heroin or fentanyl, because especially when you're talking about traffickers that have caused multiple people to overdose or multiple people to overdose and die, those people need to be held accountable with, I believe, stringent penalties. The biggest thing I would say is, there's no demographic that opioid abuse affects. It can affect everybody. There's no age group. There's no race that it affects more than others. It can affect everybody. And if you think that you have a friend or loved one or family member that's struggling with opioid addiction, do what you can to get them some help. And try not to enable them, get them some help, and try to get them into some treatment. This is an issue that's only going to get better if it's a community effort, and it's going to take all sides of it to make it better. Not just law enforcement; it's also going to be an educational side and an addiction treatment side.
Alright, we're at the West Fargo Police Department's evidence room. I have received permission from the West Fargo Police to film some of their opioid-related evidence. I put sticky notes on some of the bags here, however, because these cases are sensitive and confidential information needs to be covered. To start, I'm going to show some of the prescription opioid medications. So right here we have oxycodone. Over here we have an individual tramadol pill, and in this Ziploc bag there is Vicodin. Over here is some of the paraphernalia associated with heroin use. So these two pieces of tinfoil and these two spoons here are used for heroin users to boil the drug into a liquid form and then inject it into themselves. As you can see on the spoon, there is clear residue. Both these spoons tested positive for heroin, but these two pieces of tinfoil tested negative, so they were likely used for another drug. Over here, we have two pipes because heroin can also be smoked. This is a homemade pipe made out of a banister, while this here is a glass pipe. The glass pipe did test positive for heroin. Over here are some examples of heroin itself. So in this small bag, this bag has not been tested, so it is not confirmed that this is heroin, but it's suspected to be. In this bag over here, this is confirmed to be heroin. This was sent to the lab. Now the reason I'm wearing gloves is this next set of evidence here. So these three items were suspected of fentanyl. These two ended up being coming back as negative after being sent to the state lab, while this has not been sent, so this still potentially could be fentanyl. When fentanyl comes into a lab techs need to take a lot more precautions, such as wearing gloves and protecting themselves. They also have to have Narcan in their lab. What Narcan does is it blocks the opioid receptors in the brain and can delay an overdose. It is administered intranasally. As well as if anything gets in your eye or on your skin, you can flush your eyes or use the overhead shower here to clean it off of you. The prominence of fentanyl and carfentanil rising in our streets is posing a giant health risk to our law enforcement, evidence techs, and all other first responders. Naloxone, more commonly known as Narcan, is administered intranasally in order to turn around an opioid overdose by blocking opioid receptors in the brain. Alright, I'm at an ambulance service which is giving me training Narcan to demonstrate on this dummy how to administer Narcan to an overdose patient. So, for the purpose of this demonstration, I am using saline to represent Narcan. In a Narcan set, the way you administer it is you take off the cap on the back here. Take off the cap here, so attach the intranasal device and attach the actual naloxone itself to the back. Once you screw that on, It will mist out of here into the nasal cavity, and the way that you administer to the patient is you would give 1 milliliter per nostril. Then one to the other nostril. And this can help counteract the effects of an opiate overdose. On October 25th, 2017, the House Energy and Commerce Committee had a hearing on federal efforts to combat the opioid crisis. Proposed solutions for the crisis included increasing funding to federal organizations such as the CDC, FDA, and HHS, as well as increasing funding for education and for research specifically into alternates to opioid prescriptions. In conclusion, there is hope for us all. We need to come together and fight this epidemic.